What if you wanted to tell a story about a topic so sensitive, so secretive, so taboo even as an affair? And in order to tell that story in a real, authentic, and emotional way, you had to get the trust and belief and buy-in from the real people, non-actors that are participating in that story. How would you even go about doing that? Well, luckily for you, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's episode. Welcome to the Storytelling Lab, where we break down the art and science of storytelling. My name is Bennett. I am your host, and I'm a filmmaker and an author on a quest to understand how we can tell better stories so that we can do better work and make the world a better place. Each episode, I host one of the world's best storytellers to help you understand how to leverage storytelling to increase your sales, deepen your connections, and serve your audiences better. What's up, storytellers? Welcome back to the Storytelling Lab podcast. This is episode 207, and today my guest is writer-director Elizabeth Lowe. Elizabeth is the director of the upcoming film Mistress Dispeller. Mistress Dispeller is a documentary about a real occupation in a real industry in China. And even though it kind of hits the nail on the head in terms of what that is, you still may be like, is that what I think it sounds like? Yes, it is. I will elaborate. A Mistress Dispeller is a professional person, in this case, a woman named Teacher Wang, who is hired by the cheatee, not the cheater, but the cheatee, the person that's being cheated on, in this case, a wife, to infiltrate the affair between the husband, in this case, and a mistress, in the interest of dissolving and breaking up that affair, in the interest of dispelling that mistress. This is what the story is about, and automatically you should be intrigued as I was when I first heard about this film. But the way it was crafted so profoundly and poignantly and respectfully by director Elizabeth Lowe blew my mind. Now, I first heard about this film at Full Frame Film Festival early this year in Durham. I was already excited about this just based on the premise, and I had made a video just about wanting to see that film, and then I made a recap video after I saw it because it was so good. So I've already been singing its praises. You may have already heard it on the show. But shout out, pause for a second, because I did interview Elizabeth Lowe, the director, for this episode. But shout out to her producer, Emma Miller, because on the final day of Full Frame, a good producer doing what a good producer does, Emma just walked past me and kind of noticed me from those videos that I created. She was like, hey, are you Rain who made the videos about Mistress Dispeller? I'm like, yes. So we connected, and we stayed in touch. And 6 months later, when the movie was about to come out, I connected with their PR team because I wanted to have Elizabeth on to talk about this. This is such a peek, this intimate peek inside this love triangle that all of the actors, by the way, spoiler alert, not really, they saw the final cut and still gave approval. Not actors, all of the people featured in the film, non-actors, real people. They watched the film and still gave their sign off. Now, in order to do this, to get in there, Teacher Wang, the Mistress Dispeller, basically operated under the guise of being someone else. She is an expert in psychology, and she has hundreds of clients a year. So this was everything that you would think it would be, but the way Elizabeth handled it was what impressed me most, because they had these moments of pure, I've already said the word intimate, but I love the word stillness. And it was intentionally done by Elizabeth and her team of just setting the camera down on sticks for like what felt like 10-minute scenes. It might have been 2 minutes. I don't know. And she told me, she talks about on this episode, that she would leave the room. The whole crew would leave the room and just let the moment happen. Let the organic conversation happen. And in that moment of stillness, truth was revealed, authenticity of the people participating. It took a moment, but when they would get comfortable, it was like literally a fly on the wall perspective, and you got to see what the inner workings of this love triangle affair were and why, the motivations behind it. I mean, it was a study in humanity. Elizabeth has done this before in her first feature, Stray, where she followed stray dogs in Turkey, and you can't control them, right? You just have to follow the story. She does this so well, and she does that by gaining trust, first of the dogs in Stray. Yes, trust for them to not be uncomfortable and just go about their normal lives, and also trust with the people involved in this story that is very like part of their private and very secretive lives. You have to be a great storyteller in order to do that. So if you're just a fan of documentaries, you should want to see this film just based on the premise. But if you are a storyteller, I want you to watch this because of the way she crafts a story about a sensitive subject, because you may have a sensitive subject too. You may be working with non-actors too. And you will learn a lot of useful tips from her about how to craft a story when you're dealing with things which are usually hard to control. They're out of your control a little bit. So there's a big lesson in just letting go and following the story instead of, over manipulating the story. She does it so well. It's an amazing film. So I highly recommend you check it out. It comes out next week in New York first, October 22nd, I believe, and soon after in LA, and hopefully it'll trickle out to other cities and other theaters, and then streaming soon after. But you absolutely must see this. In other news in my life, the Chief Storytelling Officer is still on track to come out early next year. I think February, maybe a little bit deeper into the spring. So if you're keeping up with that, I appreciate you. Pre-orders will be out soon. But for this episode, Mistress Dispeller is an amazing new documentary, and I think it will be nominated for an Oscar. It is already in contention for that, and I think it deserves that. It will blow your mind. So if you can see it in theaters, go do that. We support theaters here. We want to keep the theater industry going, but even if you can't, whenever it comes out on streaming, go see this film. It is a masterclass at infiltrating intimate parts of people's lives in a respectful way that earns trust and therefore creates the best story. So here's my conversation with Elizabeth Lowe, and I hope that you love it. Elizabeth, welcome to the Storytelling Lab.
Thank you so much for having me, Rain.
I am excited to talk about this film. As we were saying before we started recording, I've already made several videos about this during the Full Frame season. I was there covering a lot of the films and talking to some of the filmmakers, so I'm glad we got to reconnect. I absolutely loved it. It was one of the films that I talked about most, even anticipating it. Like, I think I made a piece before, like, here's what I'm looking forward to.
I remember that.
Okay, cool. And then afterwards, I was like, oh, I was right. It was so good. Okay, so for those listening, I know what the film's about. Let's establish what the story was. Like, how do you define this film if somebody's like, what's Mistress Dispeller about? What is a Mistress Dispeller?
So as you can tell from the title, it's about an industry that's grown lately in China, where it's a service that you can hire, where if you find out that your spouse is cheating on you, instead of directly confronting them, you can outsource that problem by hiring what is called a Mistress Dispeller to infiltrate your husband's life and his mistress's life under a false identity. And through that false identity, she gains their confidence and their ear, and over time, over the course of 2 to 3 months, convinces them to end the affair, seemingly of their own accord. And so the film is about a case of a Mistress Dispeller, and we kind of see sort of a love story crumble and, return to itself from the perspective of the wife, and then the mistress, and then the husband. And you're getting like all three angles of the same entanglement.
This is one of those situations. First of all, I think it's like a masterclass in like log line technique. Like, seeing the title, just hearing the one sentence description, you're already hooked, which is why I was talking about it ahead of time. And it absolutely delivered. Like, it's so much better. The interest and intrigue is already there because you hear what you just said and you're like, what? But then the delivery and the execution was so good. Not only did it not disappoint, it like went far above and beyond. So I got to ask, like, were you familiar with this industry prior to pursuing this for the story? I know as storytellers, our antennas are kind of always up.
Yeah.
But did you know about this earlier, or was it something you learned about more recently?
So I had found out about the phenomenon in like 2017, read articles about it, but I always thought that this premise is so spectacular and, so enshrouded by shame, presumably, that this would only be possible as a fiction film. But in 2021, when I met Maggie Lee, our China-based producer, she's incredible at getting access, and I tasked her with finding real Mistress Dispellers in China. And she found dozens of them, and we met with them in China. But teacher Wang who is in the film, was the only one who on day one of our scouting trip already got us access to film with a husband, a wife, and a mistress at the tail end of a case. And that remarkable relationship that she had with all three of her clients was so stunning and took us aback that I thought, there's a film here, because I was so moved even by one afternoon spent with her and witnessing a husband who was the cheater, breaking down and crying in front of her. And my sympathy really leapt out to him. And that experience of feeling my empathy expand to corners that I wouldn't have expected it to, that felt like such a meaningful exercise. And just being human, I wanted over the course of 90 minutes for audiences to feel that same expansion of empathy that I experienced in that one afternoon.
And that was like upon initial meeting.
That's
was breaking down crying.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. I love that so much. Of empathy is hard sometimes, right? And I think it's very easy to cast this, paint with a broad brush and just be like, cheater, bad, boom, without trying to dive into like, why, what's going on. And I think that is a tricky road to navigate. But I love that you led with that genuine curiosity, right? And empathy and understanding. I mean, that's really powerful. I did not know that that part of it. I want to back up just a little bit when we were talking about, I had mentioned storytellers and filmmakers, and writers having their antennas always up. I also had read that like what led you to Stray was the previous film you did, 2021. I want to say that came out. Was reading history, basically reading about how the dogs were treated historically and then more recently. So, and we can talk about that specifically if you want to, but the question is, how do you find your stories? Like, are you constantly in pursuit of them? Do they not fall into your lap, but do they kind of like organically reveal themselves and you're like, ooh, that's interesting?
Yeah. So with the first film, Stray, which was my first, attempt at a feature-length film documentary longer than 70 minutes, I think I approached that very naively. I think the thought I had to myself was, what do I think is worth, stretching my craft to expand beyond the short films that I've done thus far in my life? And to me, I love dogs extremely, an extreme amount. And I thought, it came from a personal place. I had a dog growing up that died. And I remember when he passed away, I felt this grief had to be suppressed because he wasn't a human family member. And that kind of duality where some beings are afforded more care and empathy than others, that really troubled me. So I wanted to make a film that sort of asserted the importance of any perspective, and even one as lowly as a stray dog's. And so in researching, what countries had a lot of stray dogs where there could be a lot of rich stories, it emerged that Turkey had this incredible relationship with stray dogs where the government has tried to, excise the city of its stray dogs, and in this attempt to westernize and modernize repeatedly, rounding up all the dogs. But the people have such a fondness for the dogs that they've protested to keep the dogs safe and to, allow them to thrive and live among them. And ironically, I filmed that in 2019, and sadly, it's 2025 now. And at the window that I was filming, the dogs were allowed to flourish in cities like Istanbul, but now the government has been rounding them up yet again and culling them across the country. So you never know when you're making a film whether the film that you're going to make is going to end up being this time capsule of this precious moment. And with Mistress Dispeller, I think because of my experience of making Stray, which took place in Turkey, and I'm originally from Hong Kong, and I have lived in the States for a long time too, it was a culture that was so foreign to me, this Mediterranean culture, that it was so eye-opening to see the way that they related to a species that's very familiar to us, but they related to them in such a different way that I found really enlightening. I wanted to replicate that experience in mainland China, to sort of get to know a country through the act of documentary filmmaking, because that allows you into these spaces that you would never normally be permitted into. And I'm from Hong Kong, and China, of course, is of increasing relevance in the world and also in my own home city. So I also thought that love would be the most intimate way into people's hearts and to get to know a culture in that way. And so as I was like researching, looking at love, I thought, again, sort of like Stray, what would love and family look like, but from the perspective from the margins, and who occupies the margins of love stories? It's mistresses. And, in the case of Stray, I looked at Turkish society from the perspective of stray dog wandering through through the cities.
The margins.
And in this, the margins, mistresses occupy an illegal space of affection. And I wanted to look at that. Through that perspective.
That's so good. I love that that through line. That's really powerful. So when you're following a story like both of these, I think now I'm really seeing the parallels, which obviously you're the common factor there. As a documentary filmmaker, do you fully lean into following your curiosity and your empathy and let the story kind of reveal itself to you? Or, and maybe the question is, where's the line? Or how much control do you try to have into crafting the narrative? Like, I need this is what I need. Or do you just, take all the guardrails off and just follow your curiosity?
Yeah. So I think I tend towards the latter, where I am very reactive rather than directing what's happening. My job, I feel, is to capture what's unfolding in front of me instead of trying to influence it and interrupt it. And especially with Stray, because the dogs, they're stray dogs, they're not on leashes. You can't tell them what to do. They're not used to being told what to do. I was truly surrendering the narrative to their canine sensibilities, and that was the grand experiment there. With this film, Mistress Dispeller, I think because I began with this impetus that I wanted to generate empathy to all three corners of a love triangle that you might not normally, whether it is the wife that chooses to stay in a marriage despite finding out that her husband has cheated on her, where that could elicit judgment, or whether it's the cheating husband, or whether it's the mistress who's chosen to fracture a existing family unit. I wanted each character to be complex enough and sympathetic enough that there's some deep reason that you could identify in yourself for each of their positions, what they're going through in life and why they would make those choices. So that in some ways set up the parameters for the kinds of people that we would permit ourselves to want to tell the story about. So there were cases that we filmed over 6 cases over 3 years. Okay. And the film only features one case.
Right.
But there were cases where, sometimes the men were behaving in ways that may be sensational from a filmic perspective, in which, they were making moves on their mistress in front of the camera, where it might be juicier. But that didn't align with the vision that I had, like the reasoning for why I wanted to make this film. And so in those cases, they didn't sort of make the cut. And that's where I'm exerting control and kind of like the vision of the film.
And like
But I'm never directing, what happens in the case itself.
Standing your ground sounds a little too like forceful, but like, just upholding your values and your vision, right? I really respect that, because you're right. It would be juicier. And you could argue that might get more butts in seats, but it's not true to the vision that you had. I think that's really like, I'm inspired by that. Like, I admire that, like kind of sticking to what you wanted to do. And it would have been a different story. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's still, we're in this space of empathy. You're so right that all three parties in a love triangle are almost equally, maybe equally at times, judged. Like, they're all criticized. And I'm really glad you outlined that. The cheated on party just as much if they stay. It's so true. And obviously the mistress and obviously the cheater. That's such a good point to pursue that. I want to stay here in this space of characters. You answered this in the Q&A, which was, it got a good laugh. So I'll just start with this question of like, how did they agree to this? That is the real question, because you air all their dirty laundry, so to speak. You put it all out there and they're comfortable with it, ostensibly. So first of all, how did you get access and permission? And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, they got to see the film before You
Yes.
released? Yeah. Okay. So
Yes.
that's also
Yes.
that permission I think is really important to mention too. So yeah, how did you execute this with a topic so sensitive and so typically in the shadows that you're like, I'm going to put it out all out there?
Oh yeah, I can give you sort of like the extended behind the scenes, even to before
Sure.
we found this couple that we got the access to. So initially, we thought, we would try to find mistresses and wives or men who were getting cheated on first, who might require teacher Wang's services, who didn't know about mistress dispelling as an industry, but perhaps needed these services, and we would
Hmm.
pitch to them, hey, you're suffering from this problem. If you participate in this film, we can introduce you to this incredible mistress dispeller and she can help solve your problem. So first we went about that way. But what we discovered in trying to cast ourselves from people who were facing infidelity but didn't know of teacher Wang's work or her reputation, they didn't respect her. And so
Hmm.
the dynamic between them wasn't authentic. And so that didn't work. And so we very quickly surrendered and said, okay, we are only going to make this film from teacher Wang's existing organic incoming pool of clients. And so out of maybe 100 cases that she has every year, a handful would agree to be filmed. And of those handful, we would pick the people who really were doing it for, almost like altruistic reasons,
Hmm.
that they felt that in sharing their personal story, that it would help other people who were going through the same kind of domestic turmoil. And so in whittling that down, finally, we filmed with, 6 cases over the course of 3 years, but we were never able to get the beginning, middle, and end of an authentic case in all those 3 years. We only got bits and pieces. And finally, the reason why we were able to get the access that we did that ends up in being in the film is that 2 years prior to production, the little brother of the wife who is in the film, he
Hmm.
himself had been a client of teacher Wang's, where he was getting dispelled um, as a lover to a wealthy woman who wanted to get rid of him. And he stayed friends with teacher Wang despite realizing the role that she played in his life, which is to have him dispelled. And so 2 years later, when his sister comes to him and says, my husband is cheating on me, what do? I don't know what to do. He says that he has the perfect solution to, be in this film because he had a good experience with us. And then also that teacher Wang is this kind of magician who can make her problem go away. And that's how we had this pre-existing trust established with the wife from the very beginning, even though we had never met her at first. And she
Hmm.
also really believed in teacher Wang's skills because teacher Wang had the voucher of approval from her brother. And then from there, we knew that we couldn't let the husband or the mistress know teacher Wang's real identity, because that would completely derail the way that teacher Wang works, in which deception is so much a part of her strategy, her technique. And so from an ethical perspective, they were approached to be in a film very broadly about modern love and marriage and dating in China. And that's what they had agreed to at first. But by the end, we knew, my producer Emma Miller and I, we knew that we had to show them the film. We had to let them know, fully grasped the role that teacher Wang had played in their lives, and that she was this professional who was hired to do this job to break up their affair. And at that point, they would have the option to back out and drop out. And because we had filmed with so many different love industries over 3 years, because we weren't totally sure, what shape and what level of access we'd be able to get, we had all these contingency plans. We filmed at dating camps, divorce lawyers, matchmakers, telephone marketers who are promising love. So we had filmed with so many industries. We knew that even if they had dropped out, we had backup plans that we could make a film about love in China. And so that's
That's
how we were able to approach it ethically, but preserve the authenticity of the deception that's involved.
well said. I love having the backup plan, and it's coverage, right? It's just
Yeah.
it's coverage essentially. But what I love about this world is not the Mistress Dispeller world, the world of storytelling and documentary filmmaking, is that there's always that little bit of magic, right? That happens. I mean, just the organic connection between the brother, knowing that,
Yeah.
and that little bit of help that we get that helps bring something home. But I think it's really important to articulate, like you just did, you have to have some backup plan to build your pieces with. And then every now and then you get a little help, but it doesn't happen unless you're out there pursuing this thing. So I think that's interesting. You may not be able to answer this question, but I am really interested. You said the Mistress Dispeller had like 100 cases a year. That seems like a lot to me. Out of 365 days. So, and the answer for you, this case in the movie might be different than others. Again, you might not be able to answer this, but like, how long does it generally take her to achieve the results she's after?
She said that it used to take her 3 to 4 months to solve a case. Now she's become more masterful at it. So it can take her from 1 to 2 months. So it ranges, I think, between 1 month and 4 months. And so obviously some may drag out longer to 6 months or 7 months, but she's charging by the hour.
So she has multiple clients at the same time.
All the time. That's why in the film you see she's constantly on the phone.
That's true. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's because she's constantly, putting out fires with different clients.
How does one fall into that occupation? Again, you might not be able to answer that.
Yeah, no. So she herself, her background in her family, she'd experienced infidelity in the generation before her as well. And so, to lift herself out of that situation, she started studying psychology, self-taught, and then kind of developed into a kind of family counselor, but developed a niche in helping women who were dealing with infidelity. And then so the Chinese media are the ones who actually coined her as a Mistress Dispeller. And so she became known for that work, even though she didn't, purposefully start in this one sector of therapy, sort of. A very practical, pragmatic approach to therapy, where it's very interventionist.
It's interesting. It's funny how you can almost always tie, like, how we ended up where we are doing what we do, any of us. You can always trace it back to something, perhaps some trauma that happened or something that you were navigating emotionally and psychologically. I think that's interesting that's where hers came from. You were talking about Stray, right? You had a dog that you lost that created this thing inside your head, that this voice that didn't quite go away. And I think that happens very frequently, right? The things we end up doing stem from a place of trying to answer a question or perhaps overcome, a pain point or something like that. So, speaking of which, when did you feel like, and you might not be able to put your finger on a moment, that this was the path that you wanted to pursue as a storyteller? Were you, did you go to film school for it, or were you, writing stories like this, a journalist as a child? Sometimes I see that story. When did you know that, like, oof, this is where I want to go?
I think it was in high school, where we had this amazing English teacher who taught us, he showed us a film. He showed us like books about colonialism and films, and the way that he broke down those films, he unpacked them the way that you would a piece of literature. And beyond the enjoyment of film itself, it taught me to read film as literature, and that made me fall in love with it. To see it as something beyond entertainment. And I think from then on, I think that was like 9th grade, I took it really seriously, but I also really enjoyed it. I enjoyed consuming films. I loved going to the movie rental store to go get films every week or every other night. And I think the teenage part of me thought to myself, it would be amazing if my homework was to watch movies. And so I made that a reality by going to film school. But it was really at NYU Tisch, where I was studying film, that I discovered through a required class documentary filmmaking. And I enjoyed the process so much because one assignment was just, make a film about anything in New York City. And I chose to make a film about, the Bronx Zoo. And I thought, what a strange phenomenon that we bring our kids here to stare at other living beings behind plexiglass. And that was my only question, to examine that. But then in doing that, I discovered that there was a African man called Oda Benga, who was a pygmy, who was, put inside the monkey house on display alongside monkeys as a human being from Africa. And he committed suicide shortly after he was released, and that was just at the turn of the century. And that story emerged and made its way into the short film I made as a film student. And that experience of just feeling like reality is there, you're looking at it, and you just dig beneath the surface a little. You take this time to pause and look at something that seems innocuous, and suddenly there's all these layers of history, of colonialism, of racism, and then also speciesism, which, as you could tell from Stray, is something I care a lot about. That experience was so enriching, I fell in love with the documentary process, where you can do it with so few people, and you can do it just with one camera, and it can get done. And that's how I fell into documentary filmmaking.
That's a good point. You mentioned having, not having fun is not the word you use, entertainment, right, of watching these films. I still enjoy watching films. What role does the entertainment factor play in documentaries in general, or yours? And I'll frame it like this. I think Michael Moore once said, so like 20 years ago, that like, and the topics of his films, so they're pretty heavy. He's like, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he's like, people are still going to go home together that night, like with their spouse or whomever they saw the movie with. Like, you can't bring them to this point of despair so much that like they're angry or upset the rest. They still want to go enjoy their night with their loved one, right? And so what he was saying was there has to be, it can't be just complete hopelessness and despair, and there has to be some entertainment value. I think in Mistress Dispeller, levity is definitely a part of it. I mean, there were moments where the whole theater was laughing out loud. So how do you approach that kind of nuance of like, this is a topic that's serious, and does entertainment play any factor of it, because you're still creating it for the enjoyment of an audience?
Yeah, I respect Michael Moore so much, and I think he's such a great filmmaker, and he's one of the few documentarians who's able to reach a mass audience and break through categories. So I think, he has a lot of wisdom. For myself, like the humor that emerges out of Mistress Dispeller, I didn't foresee it myself. Like, I did not expect that it would have the kind of raucous laughter that it does, even though I myself, when I was in the field watching sort of these awkward moments unfold in front of the camera or from behind a monitor, I was chuckling too. But I don't think to laugh at the participants, but really to laugh in recognition of we're all human. We know what it's like to feel embarrassed, to feel uncomfortable, to have your heart broken, to be led on. All these feelings that I think are really universal. I think that's what we're laughing at, the discomfort of watching someone else going through those emotions and seeing a piece of yourself in that. And I think humor and laughter is the way that you release that kind of tension of discomfort. And it comes, again, I think at its heart, it comes from empathy. And so I think it's actually no surprise that this film that's about something so intimate like love and betrayal would elicit this kind of, this entertainment. And as a storyteller, I am, even though my films, I think, are obviously very independent and they're not, highly commercial, I am still always thinking about audience. Like even in Stray, that film that is entirely told from the perspective of dog and mostly doesn't have dialogue, you're still picking up snippets of the dialogue that's happening, the human dialogue that's happening around the dog, whether they're witnessing protests that are unfolding in the streets or women talking about their love lives or couples arguing. And I always saw those moments in that film as treats that I was giving to my audience for staying with the dog, giving them things that humans would be interested in, whether it's gossip, political, or love related. And so and Mistress Dispeller, it's almost like I zoomed in on one of those couples conversations that were happening around the dog and made an entire film out of it, to really relish in the gossip. And gossip, I think, is this glue that helps us define what our boundaries are, our moral boundaries as communities, for better or for worse. And I think I really hoped that Mistress Dispeller would become this vehicle that you can debate about it with your loved one or your friend that you went to go see it with your boy or your boyfriend or girlfriend. There's so many interpretations to be made about who belongs with who in that story, who really loves who, and whether the ending was for better or for worse.
Talk to me about, and we've touched on this already. In fact, you used the word trust, and I already wanted to go into that space. How do you establish and maintain trust with your characters? And so we can talk about Stray, we can talk about Mistress Dispeller, we can talk about in general. How do you establish and maintain trust with your characters in a nonfiction film in a way that continues to serve the story in the best way, in the best manner?
Yeah. In the case of Mistress Dispeller was a very unique situation because the husband, wife, and mistress were clients of Teacher Wang's. And we didn't want to disrupt her process or corrupt it inadvertently by getting too close with them and, you know, spilling the beans midway through her the case. That Teacher Wang, we really tried to mitigate our interactions with them as much as possible so that we wouldn't sort of get too close and impact the case and let slip things that we shouldn't have. And so there was a certain distance there. But I think in terms of building trust, you know, all of those characters, they only agreed to a few days of filming at most at the beginning. That's what they had, you know, agreed to. But it was that interpersonal chemistry that you have with your participants that, you know, just a simple smile, being nice and humble and really, I think all of us in our film crew, we approached them without judgment because that was the whole seed of origin of the film, the whole motivation for the film. And I'm sure people can feel that. And they can feel that we were genuine in not wanting to make them look bad. And that's our job. Our goal was not to, you know, have a gotcha moment with them.
Right.
And so I think people can tell that. And so that's why they allowed us from only the first few days of filming to allowing us to follow them for 4 months. And a lot of credit, I think, in the negotiations with the participants has to go to my producer, Maggie Lee, who is incredible at getting access and maintaining access, and also with Teacher Wang, the trust that she has with her clients, and then the trust that we built with her over 3 years, which was not an easy journey. There were many times where she grew tired of us and wanted to kick us out of her office, which she did, which is why throughout those 3 years, which is why we were able to, you know, go trips across China and get all these national park scenes and other scenes and industries. So, you know, there was a lot of difficulty, but I think there's a lot of persistence and the trust that comes from persistence, the fact that we didn't give up. I think they all grew to respect that too. Yeah,
absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, a lot of times trust is just established through not necessarily repetition, but just time, right? Consistency. Yeah. That's the word, right? Like you're going to show up. I know they're going to be there. Yes. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. Yeah. We talked a lot in the Q&A, and one of the things that stuck out to me the most, was these beautiful moments of just stillness is what I called them, where, I mean, the camera's not moving, it's on sticks. And I mean, some of these scenes felt like they were 10 minutes, not in a bad way, but just, and I know they probably weren't that long, but just long scenes. Okay. All right. Yeah. So one shot, 1-2 shot or something like that. And those were, I think, were a lot of the most powerful moments of the film. Talk about authenticity. I mean, talk about feeling like, you know, the cliche, like fly on the wall perspective, where I am just like we were just saying, like overhearing someone's gossip, or just like, I just got a sneak peek access to this person, these people's personal life. It really felt that way. So, but what's interesting to me is when we think about tension, as storytellers, it often gets conflated with, fast pace, fast cut, you know, boom, 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 soundtracks that are kind of like pumping and making your heart beat fast, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And sure, that's a way to build tension. But what I love so much is that these moments were like, and sometimes they wouldn't talk for 30 seconds, 60 seconds. And then they'd say something. And yes, we got some of our levity during those moments, but also it was super tense. So talk to me about and I know it was conscious, about the decision to just let those moments be. And again, not try to over control it as the filmmaker, as the puppet master, but just let those moments be, because they really, really worked.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you relished in those moments too, because I have the same sensibility in which there is so much tension in the silence, and that you're just letting it be. And it was really designed that way. I think I was really, just from the nature of Teacher Wang's work, which observed how so much of it is just tabletop conversations, and you're seeing her weave her magic and her Machiavellian sort of schemes through whatever gesture or seed she drops, and then the other person picks it up and takes it in the direction that she hopes that they'll end up in. I really wanted, and then that, her practice. And then also I had seen Chantal Akerman's Jean Dielman, which is a lot of this revolutionary film with long fixed frame takes in a domestic kitchen, elevating a woman's life and her routine. And to me, Mistress Dispeller is so much about the emotional labor that women go through to maintain these relationships. And so I wanted to really give these characters the stage to fully express themselves and for you to be able to witness that. And one of my pet peeves as a filmmaker, knowing how films are made, is the Frankenbiting, dialogue, where you can tell it's the editors or the producers scripting what people are saying by cutting together what they're saying, and it's not authentic. And you can tell the reaction shots are built and you don't necessarily believe in it. And I really wanted to avoid that because the premise of the film itself is already so unbelievable that the less cuts that we had in these long 10-minute scenes, the more you could believe in the veracity of them, and also relish like you're watching a play unfolding in front of your eyes. And I really hoped it was something that people would want to go back and watch it again, so you can, your eye can pay attention to a different corner of the fixed frame. And on a very practical level, what it allowed us to do is that we could hit record and then exit the room so that they could have as much privacy and be as unself-conscious as possible. So most of those scenes were not in the room.
Yeah, I think that's, and I was going to ask about that because I remember you mentioning that at Full Frame.
Yeah.
Is that uncomfortable as the filmmaker to just like talk about the word trust, right? Like, all right, we're just going to hit record and then we're all going to, like, everyone on the crew backed out of the room?
Yeah.
So
because they would just wear lavs.
They had lavs, so audio was still monitoring from the other room. Yeah.
Well, we also had monitors that we could monitor.
So that choice was just to give, make them feel like they're in the room by themselves, which they quite literally were, in the interest of getting the most authentic response or reaction.
Yes. And of course, they're constantly aware that the camera is there. And there's even a scene where you see the husband right before he confesses to the Mistress Dispeller. He stares dead into the camera's eye. And we're not in the room, but he is obviously measuring, do I do this in front of the camera?
Oh, my gosh. I remember that so
there
vividly.
is an awareness that they're in media, but without our presence, we're hoping that, however unpredictable these scenes are going to play out, that their response is not tempered by our presence. But it certainly is by the camera's presence. And Teacher Wang herself said, had the camera not been here, the broad strokes of the case would have unfolded in a similar way. But the way that people talked to each other perhaps would be much more heightened and less loving or dignified.
That was one of those moments where the whole theater laughed when he glanced at the camera. That made me just lose my train of thought. You had said something about not wanting to, like, what do you call it? Franken edit. What did you say?
Frankenbite, because it's like you're taking bites.
Yeah.
Frankenstein.
Well, that is, from what you've talked about in your style, I mean, that is the antithesis of it, right? That is reality TV. And which is over sensationalized, right? So that's exactly a strategy that's used, and this was intentionally what you were trying not to do when we're talking about those characters that it might have been juicier was the word that we were using. Well, that is an approach, and it can work for whatever their objectives and goals are, but that is completely opposite from what it seems like you were trying to do here. I had a laugh about that because that is absolutely the tactic used to build those storylines, is we're just taking pieces and reactions and facial expressions from a whole nother day and planting them in there. What do you lean on to get through the challenging times of a documentary when you're unsure, when you don't know if you're going to get the scene or the shot Heck, it can even be like logistically or financially. It's always a challenge. It feels like we're climbing uphill. So how do you navigate that as someone with, you have a clear goal? I'm trying to tell this story. I want it to be as authentic as possible. I want it to be as good as possible and enjoyable. How do you navigate that when it's tough, which happens often?
I think my approach with documentary, and partly I think that's why I've loved it, is that it almost feels like anything you get is already exceeded your expectations. Like it's already a bonus. Everything that you capture is beyond what you could have imagined. And so I don't ever truly feel like a lack. I mean, obviously sometimes there are lacks, but it doesn't bother me so much. And I think it's part of my approach where, you know, even the fixed frame approach, you know, even if someone goes out of frame or it's outside of my control, like I'd rather stay calm and let things unfold even off screen in the sound than chase action. Because I've found that the most sort of potent material ends up coming from those moments of patience. And that's something that I've just kind of like cultivated as the way I approach filming reality. And so, yeah, the stresses, I think, and I think, you know, when we're not getting what we want or we're not able to get the access, I do feel like I lean on my producers a lot. And that's where, when you have great producers as a director, it's an incredible relief because they are also managing your expectations. And, you know, I know for someone like Maggie, she was constantly managing Teacher Wang and she did an incredible job. And probably half the stresses that she had, she didn't tell me all about it. Only, you know, when she finally got to a place where she had to tell me. And so I feel very thankful for having a crew who's so supportive in figuring out, you know, contingencies. Like Emma was always there to talk through what, if we can't get A, can we rely on B or C? Is that enough? And having sounding boards is incredible. And, you know, I had the privilege of working with our editor, Charlotte Munch Bengtson, who had also edited All That Breathes, The Act of Killing, and Truffle Hunters, all films that I deeply respect. And I remember when she first looked at the project, she said, you know, what the project suffers from is too much material. And it's just about having to like isolate and cut down and really preserve what is sacred about the footage. And so I think because of the amount of time and dedication that we spent, which maybe the shooting ratio is highly inefficient and not a great shooting ratio because it's so high to what was used. In the end, we had the luxury of having an abundance of material.
I think there's a lesson in that, though, because, I mean, we've talked about you having this contingency, this backup plan, or like I think you were just talking about Emma saying, like, if we don't have that, we can do this, and just being patient and allow it to happen. So I think if we're thinking about it through the lens of like a first-time filmmaker, I think that's valuable. I mean, it's certainly better to have too much footage than not enough, right? And at some point, if you're going to follow this thread of curiosity and follow this story where it takes you, you have to have, well, I've said the word coverage before, so you know, so you have to cover your butts and have something to show, and then of course remain patient and hope that it reveals itself to you, which in this case it certainly did. But if it didn't, you know. If it didn't reveal itself in the way that it did, you would have to have created something, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a fair point. Even though once you get the editing room, that's challenging. The more footage you have to go through, but that's the fun part too of building the story.
But nothing is perfect. I think as a documentarian, you have to accept that. Otherwise, this field will drive you mad.
Indeed. Thinking again through that, like speaking to like maybe a first-time filmmaker, talk to me about, and this is similar to what we were just saying, so we're kind of piggybacking on the previous question, scheduling is where I want to talk about, and the run and gun style. So with Stray, like you can't exactly say, what was the main character, Zayton? Is that right?
Yeah.
So you can't just say, Zayton, we need you from 5 to 9 today. So
No.
see you there. Don't be late. And with
Yeah.
Mistress Dispeller, I assume that if something was going on, like it was, again, you're not dictating what time we're going to shoot. If Mistress Dispeller
Mhm.
saying like, hey, they agreed, I've
Yeah.
got them here now. So
Yeah.
how do you navigate that? Again, thinking about kind of maybe teaching someone else, how do you be comfortable with that of just like, I got to be ready to go whenever and hope that I get what I need. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're kind of like floating and maybe not feeling so grounded, but you still have to capture what you
Yeah.
need to build the story.
Yeah. I think I like that sense of lack of control. I
Mm,
like the sense that I am just following in the wake of my characters, and they're the ones leading me through the streets the way Zayton was. I had no idea where she was going every night. And in the case of Teacher Wang, it was her sort of, you know, setting the schedule for when she would meet her clients, what we could get access to. And I think I don't know what it is, but my personality thrives in that kind of uncertainty. And I think embracing that is important, and understanding that you don't have that much control, because this is not a fiction film set. Um, People are not obligated to be in your film. And you are trying to capture reality as authentically as possible, if that is what will lead to the best film in your mind. And so that's always been my belief, that you have to
mm.
stay flexible and be dedicated, be the most reliable person in the scenario, even if your characters don't show up some days, that
Mm.
you're there.
That's a good point. That was a great answer to that question. Before we go, I want just one more question. I know I had read something that you mentioned, like, I've got it written down. My drive as a person and an artist is to challenge dominant narratives that I feel are destructive. So
Mhm.
my question is not necessarily specifically about that, but we can talk about that, but more about the person and the artist, right? So I am a creator. I create this art, no matter what medium. And this is who I am as a person. Talk to me about that intersection. Um, how do you navigate that? Do you feel strongly that you need to be the same person in both of those roles, and there needs to be, that clear overlap and intersection? Is there a world where it's like, this is who I am, but this is just a story I thought was cool that I wanted to tell? But from your perspective, like, who are you trying to be as a storyteller?
I think I find the most enriching films are the ones that feel like they're nourishing my soul, because they're flipping things in my head, like my presumptions about the world, my prejudices about the world, that they're getting shattered. And that's what I hope that my films do. And that's what each film has done for me personally. Like, even when I embarked on Stray, I had approached that film with the question, what is it like to live without love in the world? Because I assumed that stray dogs didn't experience love because they didn't have owners. That was my cultural assumption. But in the field, what I realized was that they live lives on their own terms, and they have transient relationships with people around them. And that's not to say they don't live with love.
Hmm.
So it completely reframed what the film was about, uh, and educated me. And I think with Mistress Dispeller, we went in with the question of, like, what does it take to find love, to keep love? When love fades, what does one do? And, at the end of that film, I don't think I necessarily have any answers. Um, but I think I went in with an open mind, and I went in with a political awareness too. Like, I think from my perspective, maybe because I grew up in Hong Kong, um, I am hypersensitive to the hegemony of the West and the narratives that they tell about the world, whether it's human supremacy over animals, um, or, in this polarized world that we live in, this increasingly, the anti-China sentiment that is so
Hmm.
prevalent in the West. I knew that whatever film that I chose was subject matter. It couldn't be I didn't want it to be weaponized
Hmm.
by people to create rifts. I wanted the subject matter I chose in a place that's as sensitive as China, because of the nature of the world that we live in, to be unifying, that people would find it relatable, and that would be portraying a side of China that we don't often get to see in documentaries. And so that kind of political impulse does inform the kinds of films that I want to make. And for my next film, I think about how we're living through this climate crisis, and it's an undeniable part of our lives, and yet it's so easy to compartmentalize out of it, even though it's like facing us every single day. And so I think each of my films is trying to grapple with the issues that I am concerned about most, but also balancing that with entertainment and what I personally would enjoy to watch.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you that as a fellow filmmaker and storyteller, but also as an audience member, like, your voice so clearly comes through. And now that I've spoken with you in a deeper capacity, your vision that you've clearly like cast from the beginning of this is so evident in your work. And I just want to applaud you for that, because everything that we've talked about here today is so evident, and you're navigating these kind of nuanced, tricky waters too. It's not, it's not easy stories that you're attempting to tell, and you are really doing it in a beautiful way. So I appreciated this film so much. As we said, like, I was already, praising it before I had seen it, and certainly afterwards. So I appreciate you being here and sharing all of this with me and with my listeners so much.
So much. This was such an encouraging conversation. And also, back then when you like talked about Mistress Dispeller before anybody had known about it, it meant so much to have that kind of spotlight from your platform. So I really appreciate the time you've taken today too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My pleasure. And I can't wait to see it again. So remind me again, it's October 22nd in New York, and LA when?
October 24th in LA, and then it kind of rolls out into 15 cities across the US from there.
Got you. Are you going to any of the screenings in New York when you're back? Nice.
Yeah, I'll be going to most of them.
Awesome. Well, good luck. I am so proud of the film. It's incredible. And for those out there listening, absolutely go see it. It delivers on the wildness of that log line we talked about at the very beginning. Appreciate you, Elizabeth.
I'm so glad you.
My name is Rain Bennett. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed that episode, do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. If you're already a subscriber and you're enjoying the show, give us a review and let us know the value that you've gotten from it. We love to hear from our listeners and learn about the benefits that they're getting from the show. That's what fuels us, and that's what fuels the show. And if you've already subscribed and you've already reviewed it and you think there's someone else that would benefit from listening to this show, please share it with them. The more we grow, the more we can help you grow, and that's what we're here to do. Join us next time on the Storytelling Lab.